Cool. Thanks, Benny. Just to start off, just wanted to say thank you to our Meetup sponsors, Peach Payments and OfferZen. So we really appreciate the support they give the community and allowing us to host cool events like this. Peach Payments, as a start, make online commerce and digital payment acceptance easier and more accessible across Africa. So if that's something you're interested in or your company is interested in, please go ahead and check them out at peachpayments.com. And OfferZen is an online job marketplace by developers for developers. And if you're currently recruiting as a company, you can check them out. They can help you with your recruitment. And if you're an engineer looking for a new job or looking for a new career jump, you can also make use of OfferZen. Cool. And then just tech leadership newsletter. Some of you may know about it already. Some, it might be the first time you hear about it, but we have a monthly tech leadership newsletter that we send out every every month after the meetup. So tonight we'll be sending one out again. This is the previous one we sent out. It's just a curated list of interesting tech leadership content we've found over the month that will help you learn and grow your tech leadership skills. So if you are interested in this, I'll be popping out the links in the Zoom chat after I've done the intro, and you can just add your email and sign up, and you receive one email per month with the newsletter. We also have a Twitter space, so at Tech Leadership X, where we also share curated content around tech leadership. There's usually at least a tweet a day of an article or something interesting around tech leadership. We also do share our meetup, our next meetups and everything there. So if you just want to keep in tune on what's coming up next and who's speaking, if you are on Twitter, that's also one way you can follow through that. And similar to the last meetup, our sponsor OfferZen. So OfferZen is our swag sponsor. They'll be gifting some of the attendees some swag at the end of the meetup. So again, I'll post a link to this now in the Zoom chat, and I'll post it again later on as the meetup is going. You just need to fill in the form with details about yourself and where they'll be sending the swag if you do happen to win. So yeah. That is it. Over to you, Benny.
Awesome. So we're very privileged to have Jared Wesner with Wesner. Am I pronouncing his surname correctly, Jared?
Yeah, that's good. It's good.
Awesome. So very interestingly, I met Jared on the interwebs on LinkedIn. I saw he actually posted an incredible topic or article about how he moved completely remotely and had quite a cool post around it. So I reached out a little while ago just to have a conversation and about some of the things that he was thinking about, how he's running his teams, and just had an awesome conversation. So he's a technical leader who's spent the last 2 years developing frameworks and processes that support and maintain a healthy and productive team culture and work with a work environment within a company that's working remotely. The efficiency of these systems has allowed him to go fully nomad, leading his rapidly growing team from afar, and he's now sharing his advice with fellow tech leaders. So Jared is currently the co-founder and chief technology officer at the Delta, which I believe is a venture builder. You could probably correct me if you want to, Jared. But he's when he says he's fully nomad and remote, he's actually not in Cape Town. Apparently, he's in Georgia. And so I think he's got a lot to share with us. The title of his talk today is called Nomad Leadership and Scaling Teams Remotely. And the description is, how do leaders manage and scale teams remotely? ? What are the do's and don'ts? ? It's a truly remote async culture possible, and what does that look like? So yeah, we really look forward to your talk, Jared, and really want to learn some of the things that you folks are doing at the Delta.
Awesome, thanks. Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. I see there's some Delta people as well, so thank you for coming by after a long day of work. So let me just get my screen up, and then we can get going. And hopefully you guys can participate today, because I don't think you want to hear me talking for a whole hour. You can ask the rest of the Delta team how they feel. Cool. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah.
Lovely. Awesome. Okay, so I thought I'd just like introduce a little bit of the Delta to get the context of actually kind of like how things came about, what we're doing, and like why some of the stuff we learned matters, like how we happened on like scaling our teams remotely. And then I'll speak a bit about the Nomad leadership side as well. But like you guys are welcome to like interrupt, ask questions and stuff. It'll be cool to be more interactive than a complete talk. I've only prepared like 3 slides, so we don't want to go through all the slides in like 5 minutes. Okay, cool. So basically just some stats, and then get this out of the way. So about a year ago, plus minus actually a few months now, we're about like a team of like 20 people. We had launched like 5 products, 3 to 4 of them were actual ventures, or actually 3 of them were ventures. We were operating into South Africa, obviously Cape Town, and our highest value venture was like around 100 million. Circle back to today, I think it's a few months more than that, so it's more than just a year. We're about a team size of about 130. We've launched about 26 to 30 ventures, roughly a few 10 in like early stage, and then the rest being products that we've actually built. And we're operating in like 3 countries at the moment. So that's just a bit about like the scale over the last year, which was really interesting. It was during COVID times, and it wasn't as easy. And I'll speak a bit about that now. As you can imagine, it was actually quite a painful thing in the start, but we're very proud, and some of the team that's here today as well in the talks can probably also say the same thing. So basically, let me get that going. What the Delta really does is a corporate venture builder, and what this is kind of saying here is it's just a smart way of saying that we kind of build blueprints on solving a lot of problems within like 0 to 1. So 0 to 1 being, I need to launch a startup. I have this idea. What do I do? These are the things I do to get it, to validate an idea, or discover what the solution is, then validate it, then actually like launch it. And then when you launch it, it's very different. So running a company when you're like between like 1 to like 10 people is very different to running a company when you're like, or to running like a company of like 50 to 80 and 80 to 100 plus or whatnot. So obviously there's different phases, and there's different ways of people view things. There's different tools and processes you manage. There's a lot of different deviations. There's a lot of differences, and depending on what you're trying to do, it's quite an interesting part you go through, personally and obviously as a company. What's really cool is the Delta's like real meaning behind is change, as from a Delta sign. So being adaptable, because you have to kind of be in an environment, in a startup environment. And if you happen to want to launch like, a few startups every year, then you kind of have to have a team that is also adaptable basically to the environment, to the market. So what that's saying is like we kind of just build out blueprints, and we innovate and iterate those blueprints like we do with like lean methodologies. This is kind of explaining it just so that you guys understand quickly. So you guys might see that this seems very similar to like the lean methodology or other methodologies out there. Basically, this is just our touch to what we go through from our process. The ideation, discover, validation, and build phase. Obviously, I'm responsible for the build phase and partially the launch phase. Ideate, discover, and validate is part of our product phase. So our product teams and stuff are split completely from the engineering side, basically, but they work in groups to actually solve problems. And growth is actually the scales phase, like getting more customers, getting corporates to work with the startups, like commercialization, a whole bunch of cool stuff, investment, further seed rounds, whatever. And the industries we've worked to date, the last 3 years, has been like fintech, agri-tech, mobile tech. So we've launched a startup in basically almost every single one, except for more products in the communication side. And rather than going the wrong way around, let's go this way. A bit about me, I suppose. Currently, I'm in Georgia. We landed 2 days ago. So on Sunday, 2 in the morning, we landed in 10-degree weather after coming from Durban. I had been in Durban for a few days, seeing a friend and just taking a few days off. we had spent 5 weeks recently, like in the last bit, back in South Africa, catching up with the team, catching up with family, catching up with life, catching up with admin, and all the other things that come around not being in a country for 6 months. Previously, before that, we were actually we started off in Ukraine. Girlfriend and I basically, I'll tell maybe a quick intro to the story. I didn't mention this in one of the posts, but our girlfriend and I in March basically sold all our stuff, climbed on a plane, and flew off to, we were going to go to Bali for 4 or 5 months, but COVID lockdown hit during that time as well for Indonesia, and obviously we couldn't enter anymore. So we landed up going to Ukraine for a month. A digital visa allowed us to do that, and from there we basically figured out what we were going to do for the next 6 months. So we worked in Ukraine for a month, then we worked in Turkey, we worked in Montenegro for a month, we worked in Albania for a month, and some place that probably no one knows, which is called North Macedonia. It's this tiny little place on the map somewhere, but it was really interesting to have seen that. As I mentioned, the company size is 130. My team size currently, as it sits, is around 57 actually. I put some interesting things here, but largely I think drinking wine is the most relevant, and finding best jacuzzi spots is my forte, especially in South Africa. And as we've been traveling, we've also been trying to find places there. I would say Nomad in the fact that like we currently don't actually have a place we're staying. And obviously we're traveling and we're Airbnb-ing, and we pretty much try to stick to a new country every month. December, obviously there's no like fixed rule, we kind of do what we want, but largely we're staying right now within certain time zones. This is the furthest time zone we've been out to date, just purely because we've been testing this theory. And also as we test this, given the fact that I run a team of 56 individuals, I need to also make sure that these systems and processes that I've built actually maintain my ability to work in further differentiation of time zones in the core South African company. So just to kind of maybe give more detail so that the rest of the presentation makes sense quickly. And just raise your hand if I'm going fast. Apologies for that. So most of I think 70% of the staff are in Cape Town. The variation is Joburg, UK, one or two in Russia, and the rest in Europe. So that's like the deviation of our current staff that that work for us. And I suppose this will make sense now. So basically, back during the COVID time, the first lockdown, basically, I think a few weeks before, we had actually decided just to tell the whole company to like pack up their stuff and go remote, which is really interesting given that point in time, because a lot of companies I think were struggling with like, how could we do this, or what are the ways to do this? Can we afford to? Because you need hardware to work at home. People don't have internet necessarily. You have to make sure that the work environments make sense for your employees. You don't necessarily, because we're a private company as well, there's a lot of companies out there that are startups. You can't just afford to buy your employees everything as well, right? There's cash flow issues and stuff like that, and something I'll speak about later. But basically we went remote, which we called fully remote. We're like, no, we're fully remote. We marketed fully remote, and we're trying to hire fully remote. But to our surprise, as we scaled from 20 people, which is really easy to run a company of 20 people remotely, everyone fits on that Zoom call. You can see everyone's faces on the same screen. There's a whole bunch of like weird little things that, you realize you can't do anymore. We had all hands meeting. Everyone can be in an all hands meeting. They like last 30 minutes. Now all hands meeting takes 2 to 3 hours because it's important to us. We still do it, but it takes 2 to 3 hours, and you can barely see everyone's faces on the Hangouts chat. And I think at some point Hangouts didn't support more than like 50 or 80 people in one thing or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but I remember not being able to see everyone's faces. You lose count of who's actually come and who didn't come. So like, you do roll check? Like, how do you know if everyone came to the meeting? Because it's important to be there. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that came from that. But basically, what we did was like, most of the company was working remote together at one point in time. There's still a bias when you're working remote post the COVID time. There was still a bias to one time zone. We still have a slight bias to a time zone. For me, it's 8 o'clock right now. You guys are around 6:15 or whatever the time is. And we have 1 or 2 time zones that we work in, so the UK and Europe mostly, but like largely when there's no daylight savings, we're pretty much in sync with our headquarters, well, not headquarters, but our satellite office basically in Europe. You change all of your personal meetings and you replace them with virtual meetings. We replaced our I don't know, we replaced our boardrooms that we named like Tesla and Airbnb. We had replaced those virtually in Discord channels and Slack channels where people could come hang out and chat or like book them, as if we were trying to replicate the virtual and like, you know, the physical office basically. We still were doing company events at the office as COVID allowed. So like, obviously if we didn't have restrictions or anything like that, we would still try to do something if we could, basically. So the cultural side still happened. Things that we would miss is our drinks on Thursdays or Wednesdays or any time of the day when there was been a tough meeting or table tennis. We had just built a really cool office in the middle of Cape Town. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we had just started getting used to. Where our goal is to be is like fully remote, really. And there's a lot to this. And I suppose, I mean, I've selected a few things, but there's many different levels. And like I said to this like talk, I kind of wrote it as part one because it's just so much. But one of the fundamentals is what fully remote means is there's no preferred time zone. Your team and your company can work at any time zone at any time. And what that actually means gets a bit detailed, and I'll explain later in one of the next slides. You have to encourage documentation, because if someone's not there, they have to like be able to access some sort of source of truth, right? So source of truth becomes really important. You have to discourage like synchronous meetings just because. So like one of the points when we went fully remote, we had like hundreds of meetings. I'll show you my diary a little bit later of what it looks like just after fully remote. Well, not fully remote, sorry, just after we went remote. It's ridiculous. But like you have to discourage synchronous meetings. And if you can actually have a conversation on Slack or voice notes or even a video, like depending on how the people like interacting, people don't all like voice notes. You don't want people WhatsApping you with voice notes. Slack brought in voice notes, amazing. But you know what I mean? So there's the variations of stuff that people like and don't like, but you just can't have synchronous meetings all the time to solve problems. It just doesn't work that way. And one of the main things for like our goal here is that it provides greater flexibility and variation of things. One is inclusion. The others is being able to hire people from different parts of the world, different views, different perspectives, and you can get a real nice diverse culture inside the company. You can solve problems. The real only pain point, to be honest, on distributed workforce is cash flow and exchange rates. So that's probably another thing for another conversation. So the fun side of it, basically, just to guys show you some pictures of what we've done for the last 6 months. The top left is North Macedonia, I think it was, I hope so. The bottom left is us in tunnels in the Ukraine, under Kiev. The top middle is Cappadocia in Turkey, the same one from the bottom there, at like 4 a.m. That was tough for me. I'm not really a morning person. The far right is Turkey's Old Town, which is very beautiful. The middle bottom right is North Macedonia on a lake. Pretty much the only pretty place one of the pretty, in that entire Skopje town. Everything else is interesting. And then the bottom right again is another picture from Turkey. There were so many others to choose from, but I thought I'd just share a few things. So it's been quite awesome and flourished. And a lot of the reason why I ended up being able to get to these things is my girlfriend's very obsessed with planning. So she helped with it. Like she basically did most of the thesis, and I got a lot of trouble about that because theses are tiring and there's so many rules. And as you're getting on a plane, you get stopped, and we almost never left the country because they had in that hour certain things changed and we almost couldn't go basically. And the airline trying to also keep up with like the different rules and regulations and how fast they change. So traveling during COVID was definitely one of our biggest challenges, but and PCR tests every single time entering and exiting, which wasn't great. Okay, so this brings you to the not fun side of basically remote work. So cash flow, cost and cash flow management is really interesting. Something I particularly am not the greatest at. Girlfriend's different. She's got a finance background, so she's great at it. But you have to like plan and book Airbnbs and plane tickets and stuff ahead of time. You have to this touches like the way of working with your team as well. You have to like re-engineer interactions with family and building relationships with your company, with your employees, with the people that you built the company with. We built the company from like zero, obviously. So like the people we hired, we built really, really strong relationships with, and they're your friends, they're your family, basically. And you kind of have to like learn to cope with that and or keep up with a way of still continuing those relationships. Working longer week hours, we work basically Monday to Friday, the entire day so that we have a Saturday free, specifically building a company at this scale and what we're trying to achieve, which I'll get into now. You purely just can't have a Saturday free to see the place that you actually travel to. So you have to find time for that. And so our switch off days are Saturdays. We work furiously throughout the week so that we have that Saturday, and that's the compromise we make. So we don't have 8-hour work days, we have 14-hour work days on average sometimes. Some weeks are better, some weeks are not, and we have time to relax or whatever, but we largely spend most of our time working in the week, where we used to have drinks with friends and have dinners and do things in the week in South Africa. Time zone management is not really the worst thing, but it does keep us from some places. And that's why I said, like, as the company progresses to fully remote and being able to work in the different countries, we'll be able to go to South America and places that we actually can't travel. And I purely have chosen not to travel there. If you're potentially an employee of a company and your company is very remote, you potentially could still do that, because you could work at night or in the day, or you could move when you're working aligned with your time zone. Which I currently do now. Just for the next few weeks, I will work within the South African time zone, and then I'll slowly change that over and I'll start working in a different variation. And I'll choose and decide how I do that dependent on like what I feel is best for the company or best for the team, given the time. You work whenever you can, which is not great. I'll show you now why. Again, visas built on missing company socials is something I really do miss. We have weekly, almost like weekly socials, basically almost part of building culture, and I'll get to why we do that. There's been some bad Airbnbs. One had fleas, was terrible. Luckily, I wasn't bitten, but still. Meetings become your norm. So family, friends, and work, obviously. Internet access can be quite tough, so you have to pre-plan where you're going. You have to ask Airbnbs for internet tests because you just don't have the time to deal with shit like that. And PCR tests, which have been lovely. So I hope that kind of gives you guys a very quick, rough background of like the nomad life in a leadership position, basically. Again, these things are things that I currently experience. You may not, if you're wanting to travel from a nomad perspective. I experienced this because of the team and the scale on a given time, and because I happen to be a co-founder of the company, and I'm incentivized, and also it's my responsibility to make sure that the teams are running successfully. So I do put more time into things. Our employees don't work like this. So we try to keep people in their 8-hour days. Sometimes you have to work, you have to solve problems in ventures, and they understand. And with that, people take off when they need to as well. So you kind of balance it as best as you can. And sometimes you do it really well, and sometimes you don't. But on average, it needs to be better than none. So I explained to you, just to show you kind of my diary of what happens when you go remote and you try to replace every interaction that you would normally do virtually. This is my diary pretty much consistently for for the first year, basically, of COVID remote work. Now it's obviously very different. Some days can still be like this, given a certain week that's quite tough, but this is what you should not do, right? So this is an example of I do not do this. It's not sustainable for anyone. And you'll learn from mechanics behind this, but like these interactions aren't all just work. They're 80%, 90% work. Some of them are actual time slots for after hours, meetups and like family stuff and potentially or whatnot. So I just wanted to show you guys how you can get out of control where you're working crazy hours and whatever. But it is, like I said, there's a compromise. So to the actual talk. So I hope that was enough background to date. So what I thought about going through is some do's and don'ts, why we say documentation first. Health and participation was really important inside remote working, and specifically during COVID, the COVID period. And then asynchronous communication and feedback loops. And this is something I'm currently working on quite as obsessively as my time allows. And I think it's quite important to this whole system and to the future of, let's say, not remote leadership, but remote leadership is a fundamental, but I mean the future of leadership. So again, these are without specifically, I've pulled a few things across different spaces. So the one thing like we learned really hard, and I learned really hard, was managing the difference between like rules, guidelines, and principles, specifically rules and guidelines. And if you Google if you happen to even Google rules versus guidelines potentially, you'll see things like value-based leadership come out. An example of this is we used to interview and we were very passionate and very like egotistical almost around how we were focused on culture first, then skill sets. It's really important, obviously, to focus on culture first. But actually, in a remote world, and something we've all realized as leaders inside Delta is we've actually created, we kind of curated these values, and we hired for these values, and we said it was culture, and these values had built a certain culture, but we were very passionate about saying, oh, culture first, and it was actually the values, and things like, I think in the end we started off with our values as Delta was like transparency and grit and honesty and stuff like that. And to be honest, when we looked at it recently after this year of scaling, we honestly just think it's a bit of wishy-washy, in lack of a better word. And what we realized really, what our true fundamentals was like resilience, was first principle thinking, was constructive communication and growth mindset. Well, not principles, are values, sorry. And the principles that came from that were things like working like together when we're faced with challenges. We realized that our team fundamentally has like an insane amount of grit, something we're super proud of, by the way, but our team has like fundamentals of like grit, basically. So like when there's tough problems, often we'll come together and we'll actually solve these tough problems with whether there's many stories I can probably tell, but there's been many a time, especially in the startup space, that you kind of just need a bit of grit to get something over the line. And sometimes you need to you just need to solve problems. And that kind of started realizing that our principles would have been built by the values of the people we hired. First principle thinking, demanding context. So we had small problems as we grew, and people would start working on a feature from an engineering perspective, start working on a feature that is kind of detailed, but like they had no reason, they had no understanding of why that feature mattered. What was the reason why that was a priority? Like why? But you're working on it. So things like demanding the context, like challenging the status quo, thinking about everything that you're doing, really matters, and it's something you have to drive, because like if you don't actually think and like question, obviously we're talking about questioning in a sincere and the best of the outcome way, and not like an arrogant way. But you need to question. You can't just be working on a feature just because someone told you to work on a feature. It makes no sense. That person might not have actually understood like why that mattered, or whether it mattered or not. And they may have just thought it did. So like questioning and having these conversations and these debates are healthy for a team. And you have to actually, it doesn't just happen also. It can potentially happen depending on how people, the way of work, right? The way some people have worked at different companies, the way that they've grown up or whatever. But there's stuff that you have as a leader, you have to actually realize, select and actually instill within your teams, which is really important. So the one thing I always boast about, and the team hears me speaking about this all the time, which is like literally demanding context. Like I don't want to hear anyone inside the Delta working on one thing without understanding why. Basically. And then we got things like constructive communication as one of our other values, which is like proactive, constructive feedback and like embracing candor. We don't do candor like Netflix. We probably would love to, but it depends on the type of company you are. You can't just do that. And you can't just embrace radical transparency either. You have to you have to warm up to it potentially as well. You have to learn about it. But you have to make sure that value makes sense for your company. It might not. For us, we're trying to embrace a bit more candor and feedback, but for positive impact. So we don't want people walking away and going and like being quiet about something that they think the person could have done better at, because all that does is create it's actually quite detrimental to that person's career path. If you don't tell them and give them feedback on why they could have done something better, even if it was a 10% better, they're not going to grow. And you're going to have this person not growing on various levels of places within the company. So things like that actually start to make sense. And I think I wish I would have more time to explain like the way that we actually got it wrong on how to implement it, but because it's really hard. It's not the easiest thing to implement, and it's something you kind of constantly have to work towards. And then like one of the others I would say is other value would be like a growth mindset. And with everything we do, we're about like learning fast, enabling growth. Delta is a bit unique in the fact that because we're building a lot of different ventures and we work as little startups in the teams, we have the ability to move people into places that they can solve new problems, learn different things, and it's really tremendous for growth. And it's one of our unique places, well, let's say one of our unique value propositions, right, for people working with us. And that's something that not all companies can do, because sometimes you can get stuck being a backend developer and that's all the company has space for you to do. But as a leader, your responsibility is really to try find place for that person to grow, whether it's 2 days a month that is their own personal growth, whether it's pushing them, whether it's sitting down, building out roadmaps for them. It's your responsibility to actually make sure that that happens for them. Otherwise, you'll end up losing them if they're a talented individual. So I think things like that, like there's many I can keep going, and I'd like to probably try finish the 3 slides I promised you guys. But largely, I think, yeah, that's pretty much important. The other thing I, again, realized in the last 6 months is taking audits. So assuming expectations are clear is one thing. So often I'd explain stuff within the team as they scaled, and specifically since 80% of my team is new, and I haven't, let's say it's almost up till recently, 80% of them I've never met in person. I would explain a lot of stuff in context meetings, and I would assume that the person understood what I was, because they would reply back going, yeah, cool, this makes sense, cool, I'm on it. But to be honest, it's like an assumption you just can't make. And it's really important to actually make sure that expectations and what you expect is clear. How you do that, there's various ways to do that. An example of it is a well-defined feature request with detail is a way to make sure that like the feature is clear what you need to build and its outcome, right? That works for clients, it works for the team, and it works for general development. Expectation management is important, and being clear about what is expected. The thing I definitely think like all leaders should do regularly is actually take audits on this. And something like I haven't done as periodic as I should, but it's something I did realize. If you actually sit back and take audit on whether people actually have this expectation, whether their accountabilities are correct, whether responsibilities are correct, whether they understand what that is. Sometimes you can see it by things going wrong. Sometimes you cannot see it, and the person is doing average at their job, but they're not being exponential. They're not being exceptional. They're not really driving to what they can. And often you just need to sit back, and whether that's through a form of like survey or whether that's like one-on-ones, you do need to take regular audit on your team as it progresses through these different scales as you go, because there are these ups and downs, and then there are different levels of what you feel and how the team functions, and it progresses from, like I said, 0 to 10, 10 to 30, 30 to whatever. And those brackets are different. So you kind of have to think a bit about like what you sit back, you realize, hey, is the things that are like how it used to work, does stuff need to change now? Sometimes you can be proactive. Often it's not as easy. I wasn't as proactive as I think I could have been. And I think that's normal for everyone. They will always think that they could have done better, which is good. But I think it is quite hard to be proactive on some of this, and you don't expect the scale to come. You have to manage cash flow. You have to manage a whole bunch of different things. You can't just hire 10 extra developers and have them sitting around in case there's new work to be done. But the one thing that I think that maybe you can ask my team later, because some of them are in here today, if what we did well is we tried to explain the context behind why we can't hire that new QA person, or why we can't hire that new engineering person right now, but we'll work towards getting that person, or why we can't buy the laptop right now. And often if you're actually just very transparent and open and work with individuals well, there's never really been an issue to date. One fundamental in leadership as well is stigmatization of like mental health and well-being. And it's something I saw in COVID times, and I'm sure everyone else did. It wasn't a fun time. It was pretty hectic. There was a lot of the interviews I had, there were people being retrenched, there were people talking about deaths. It was not a great time. And I think what we also realized is actually not celebrating, but like building in systems and processes to assist, to grow, and to make it something that you can have conversations about, whether it's ADHD, whether it's something even worse, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. And embracing people's well-being, I think, is quite important. Let me get to this one. There we go. So remote don'ts, basically. Cool. So if you're trying to really like progress on fully remote leadership, leaders and exco shouldn't go into the office. It's just obvious thing. You have to lead from the top, obviously. don't replicate office processes. I already explained this a bit in experiences and rituals. It doesn't work. It's ground up. It's new processes. You solve new problems. You have to think about it. There's lots of, go check out GitLab's handbook. They've got amazing stuff. Some of the stuff that I'm talking about today, I've learned through GitLab. So go check some of that stuff out. There's like, I read handbooks from all the best companies in Silicon Valley and Europe as well, ways of work. And I learn from like the way that they work and try to implement things that only make sense inside Delta, because you have to actually, you can't just now take this blueprint and go, okay, this is going to work for my company. It won't. Don't try to transfer all in-person meetings to virtual form. You guys saw why. Don't constantly work and never take leave. So this is interesting. So we work, as you saw on the calendar, just to show you guys, we work quite a bit. The leads, the rest of the team, if I showed you a team calendars, they don't look like that. And partly it's because we love what we do at Delta and what we're building and what we're trying to achieve. So that's one thing. But the thing that it does set, and it's something that you should like be aware of as leader, is it sets this like also stigma of taking leave. We don't really have leave policies. You can take leave if you need to take leave. We don't really question it if it's needed. We often know when people have been working really hard and they need it. And we would be like, listen, do you just work till like, 10 at night or 12 at night or whatever? Don't even come in tomorrow. I don't want to see your face. Leave me alone. So like often like some of my messages to some of the more like senior leads would be like, don't even talk to me. I don't even want to see you near the office. But it's really important to actually make sure that you take leave and you also show that. You should drop messages, you should show pictures. It's not boasting, it's showing that it's okay to take time off and to reset and to relax and breathe. So it's really important. And mental health days is something we're probably also going to look at how a really nifty way to bring that into the Delta in the future. Some things to do. I don't think our one-on-ones were as amazing in the start. They were pretty robotic. They were 5 questions and they were what you Google how to do a one-on-one and you ask those questions. There's some things that I like. It was a really cool article that I read, and I took 1 or 2 things from there as well that I read like a year ago. And something was really interesting is that they structured it in, is it clear? And I really like that. It's like, is it clear that like what great work looks like, what high quality means, what on time is. On time thing gets me every time. It's something where, devs start saying done versus done. And I'm sure you guys have heard that before, potentially, where a task is done, but it's not done. So what does that mean? So like largely, I think like making sure things are clear, it's also part of someone's, depending on what type of one-on-one you're actually performing, right? But I think like what success is important. This is about accountability and it's about being clear and expectation management, right? So what is success of what we're doing right now in this team, in this venture, in this piece of work, or whatever it is, what great work looks like? Because like fundamentally, this pitch deck looks, I like to say it doesn't look too bad, but the amount of work that's gone into it is very minimal versus like, is a really dumb example, but it still looks great. So the thing is like, you need to choose what you actually, is great content, like really important, is being pretty and cool little orbs and stuff from our design standards. What is great work? And then what is high quality? Because quality can differ. Quality for an engineering, for a company that for a piece of work or a system or process or whatever that basically needs to maintain hundreds of thousands of transactions a second. High quality means redundant, resilient pieces of services, decoupling. It means a various levels of things and detail that I don't want to waste too much time. But like that's high quality for that given thing. For startup, high quality is a high quality feature, not a high quality feature, but a feature that solves a value proposition fundamentally. So like high quality doesn't need to be like, it is like the sexiest onboarding flow you've ever seen in your life. It could just be a basic onboarding flow. So like high quality depends on context. And why I mentioned the first thing that to be honest, I keep just saying context most of the times to all of our teams. Context matters, and that's it. Like if you can context and communication has been the biggest problem while we scale. And if you can find smart ways to provide the context or build it into the culture. So we started building systems that allowed you to provide context. And that worked when you're 20, and it worked when you were 40, and it worked when you were 50. It does not work at 100. It doesn't work at like a team of 56 people, because 30 of them are new and they don't have the cultural or the values to actually ask for the context. So even though there's a place for you to go find the context, they're not going to go look for it. So you build that inside of your culture and your values of the systems and the people, and then it forces them to go and think and make decisions for themselves. And that kind of is what we've used to scale. So like positive reinforcement, basically, sometimes. And then what on time is, I'm going to just drop. I think everyone knows what I mean there. I don't know if I want to maybe do a 5-second break, if you guys want to ask some questions before I go on, or can I continue?
I think continuing would be great. We've got about 15 minutes left, but we do have a couple of questions lined up in the chat. So maybe let's leave some time for them.
Okay. So this is back onto like remote leadership, and I've tried to split between just general leadership and remote leadership sometimes as best as I could. So some of the stuff I'm going to talk about now is like quick and easy parts of ways of work. So automated Slack integrations, feedbacks, lessons, cultural inputs and stand-ups and stuff like that. Setting a stage for it to be okay to decline meetings. We had this weird problem in the Delta where people just didn't say yes or no if they weren't going to come. Like they feel like they're going to hurt someone's feelings if they say no to a meeting, and you just can't do that because you have to know who's going to a meeting or not, and you can't wait till the 5 minutes before to know whether someone is doing that and why I must check up on hundreds of meetings if you're coming or not, or whether the meeting didn't make sense. If you send me a meeting invite for 2 hours of my time and you're asking me like, hey, can we chat a bit about like the Android dev? What is that? Why, where, how? So decline meetings politely and ask whether you can carry on with these conversations in Slack. Decline meetings that don't have agendas or POAs, like decline stuff, and it's okay to decline. So set cultural aspects that it's okay to say no to go to meetings. It's a waste of time if you don't need to be there. Leave meetings if you're not providing value. Make sure that the culture allows you to do that. Being like, hey, quietly in the background, I don't think I'm needed. I don't think I can provide value. Let me know if I could. Record meetings. Having access to the meetings means that certain people don't have to go if they don't feel like they need to catch up on something, like a cool update for the company. Like we don't expect the entire company to go always. Some are mandatory, some are not. But like largely, we should still provide that access to be able to see what we spoke about for everyone, and that's inclusive. Formally organized informal communication. So this is fundamental. So I think someone asked me on our post, and also part of this chat was like, how do you push culture and the relationship building side within the company when it's fully remote? So recognition channels, I don't know if anyone has them in and follows these things, but there's lots of tools to do this. We built our own relatively quickly, but so we have a recognition bot, but like having recognition part of your like culture as well, is recognizing people for work, whether it's small or whether it's large. Again, it's set with the leads and the teams and the culture and the exco as well. Like your leadership should be recognizing individuals as well as they go. Sometimes a bit tough because you don't want to only recognize a few people and not recognize the rest of individuals, but that's another story for another day. We have AMAs as well. So we have open Slack channels for exco, and we'll probably have it for certain departments as well, for people that actually want to ask questions and or about anything. So super open, you can ask anything, like literally anything that you want, obviously in a fundamental way. We may be starting to turn those into like monthlies or quarterlies where we'll select a whole bunch of things to do a podcast. We don't know yet. The engineering team, we have someone that's super passionate about gaming. He sets up like tournaments and stuff for us. So we have like a gaming channel, we have a Steam group, we have a whole bunch of cool stuff. I think twice a month the guys play games from like 4 to 6 against each other, catch up, build relationships. We have automated socials, donuts, buddy checks, and feedbacks. So we have like bots and systems and tools that allow us to like prompt feedback, book new meetups. If it knows that you haven't met or interacted before, to like book a meetup with you, get to know the person, give you some talking points. We have regular socials, obviously, like in-person ones and obviously virtual ones, but obviously they're like mostly always virtual nowadays. Cool. So back to, I think, the more important thing. So the things I like learned out of this like process, and some of the main fundamentals here was the following things. So the following 4. So you need to have your leads coaching asynchronous communication effectively. It just doesn't work if you don't do that. I mean, it's a pretty obvious one, but like you start to try make a process in a system, and you like write it up and say, hey guys, this is how we should be communicating. But it doesn't work. You have to actually bring it part of the culture again and teach people to work the certain ways. And like the fundamental is, you can work remotely. Most people want to work remotely. Most people want the flexibility, but in order to do that, you need to document, you need to talk, you need to communicate. You also need to like tell people, no, let's talk on Slack, let's do this X, Y, Z in the different ways. So you have to keep this up, and you have to embrace it with the teams, and you have to teach it, and you have to lead by example. Embrace a data-driven approach. I spoke to someone earlier today a bit about this as well, and it was just like, when it was a company of 10 to 20 people, it was really easy to manage the teams. I knew when people I knew their strong suits, their weaknesses. I knew who they were. I knew what motivated them. I understood them. I was friends with them. I'd have drinks with them. I knew the ventures that we were working on fully end to end. I knew the clients. I knew everything about it. I knew what was going on, systems, processes, everything. As you grow, you move away from that detail. And what's really important in this aspect of actually being able to have access to these like feedback loops and build these systems to still gain that same detail. I see Louis joined now, so I'll use him as a base point. Him and I really love feedback loops and using certain data points in order to make decisions, and that's really important in modern day leadership. And we use that we used to read hundreds of channels, because we've got like, like say like 50 ventures. We have like every 200-300 like project channels in Slack, and we would read channels to understand what was going on, so we could help and assist and work with the teams and whatever. Obviously, as you scale further than a certain amount of people, it becomes like impossible to do that. So the way you do that, and a really simple example is moving something like a stand-up. The notes for the stand-up for our engineering teams at least come into Slack through something called Geekbot. So we use that to actually, and I'll show you an example a little bit later. We use that to collect information, even if the people go to the 15-minute virtual stand-up anyway. We still have that because that's an asynchronous way of work. It means that anyone else can come past and read those notes that we've taken. And the teams are okay with that because they also know that they don't have to necessarily always go to this every single virtual stand-up if that team decides to still have virtual stand-ups. And they might only create virtual stand-ups if they feel it's necessary, but the team own their own accountability. They're autonomous to be able to do that. But there's a fallback, and there's always the data available to those stand-ups. Another thing we added to that is I added pulse checks. So just like basically, 0, 1, 2 basically out of the type of thing is like, how you feeling for every stand-up. So it's relatively easy. So everything we do is part of your way of work. If you open up Slack in the morning, it'll prompt you for your stand-up notes, or it'll prompt you and ask you how you're doing. And it's something quick. It's like a few seconds. And that means that people will continuously do it because it becomes part of a habit, which is really important. Increasing accountability, I'll speak about now, but it's been the hardest thing, I think, to date from my side, that's actually getting this correct. Again, DevOps is not just an engineering thing, it's a culture across the entire company. Growth ops, general operations, you get product ops, you get a whole bunch of different interesting things that people call it, sales ops, but it's a cultural thing, and you actually have to have that. Anyone should be able to, in the team, from my perspective at least, needs to be able to pull up a few tools, put a few processes together, and automate some busy work or automate some tasks that really are less important. Cool. So this is a piece that I'm working on currently, and like I told you, like in leadership, it's progressive. You kind of work on small pieces as you go. You can't get everything right, and you're unfortunately not perfect. But figuring out how to increase accountability is one of the next things on my roadmap inside the Delta, and this is a fundamental again to remote leadership. Again, I spoke earlier a bit about success. So like, what does that look like? Guidance on prioritization and why. So helping to build frameworks and ways of thought on why something was prioritized, like getting the context, demanding the context, sharing context with the team so that they can navigate like uncertainties, they can make decisions, they can understand what they're trying to do versus just giving them the answer necessarily or letting them operate in the dark. When you're scaling, urgency, everything's urgent basically. So like, and that's something to do with like, psychological safety as well. So managing and even creating a piece of paper that explains what is really urgent, what is not urgent, or at least guide you in the right direction is really important. Otherwise, you can have people that burn out on something that's not as important as it may be perceived, given that specific perspective at that given time for that specific venture. And then like, what can you reduce? Louis does this really well since he joined. I'll be nice to him. what he does this really well. So like he'll come around leadership and understand like what is like blockers on your plate, and something as leadership you should be doing. You should be understanding what is blocking your team, and you should know that. And if you don't have right now at this given point in time, if you don't know what that is, you need to go and sort out like a way to actually get that data from your team and understand that, so that you can actually solve that, because it's a really fundamental part in remote leadership. Cool. So I'll go through this really quickly. I don't think we have too much time left. But basically, Delta, given the remote side, has gone like handbook first. Something really cool GitLab kind of quoted, which is a scale by documenting. I believe it to be true. The ops team and the CPO, CEO has created like a really cool structure to our handbook off of a tool we found that works really well with developers. It shows a bit about like our mission. It helps people onboard. It provides source of truth for stuff and how things, ways of work and whatever. So I should show you guys kind of like what we go about and how we provide this content to our teams at scale. Engineering book, basically as well. So the engineering, every department has their own one, and the divisions will slowly build out their ones and provide this context as they go. There's handbooks and there's playbooks. We use handbooks as sources of truth, sources of knowledge, playbooks as basically a tutorial and or a, let's say, game day playbook. So a way to actually reproduce something, and someone can pick it up, go through the 5 steps and know how to solve a problem or diagnose a problem. So those are our 2 variations of what we have. Remote leadership, again, this is part of the engineering one. We explain ways of have WhatsApp, Discord, and Steam. We explain like how to do channel even. So like as you're reading through, as you on what you require things and there's tasks. Something the ops team did really well is like they provided like little tasks. They gamified onboarding where you'd have to go through these tasks and complete this thing, basically this asset that you created. And on your first onboarding thing, and it forces you to read, forces you to gain access, forces you to get used to the tools we work with on a day-to-day basis. And again, if everyone's not too sure, the reason why remote leadership is so important and the advantages of this is distributed teams, access to talent, inclusive and diverse teams, bringing from perspectives, tools, services, solutions, and it's obviously a competitive advantage to this. So this is of our team. So like socials that we have when we hit 4,000 followers on LinkedIn. You can see like Louis and Alex are in a car. They're going on they're going to I think it was a company retreat, not company retreat, an exco workshop, but they were going away for the weekend and meeting us there. Some of the guys are in the office, I think in the middle. So everyone is in different places. Everyone's functional. Everyone's working different and making it work basically. So the last fundamental to this, and specifically trying to build our goal of building 100 ventures a year, is like startups are quite tough, and during COVID as well, health and participation is quite a tough thing. And this is just a quick way of what we do to kind of what we focus on as a team, and something maybe you guys, I'm not going to explain it very detailed, but basically we have a way to understand our team's happiness. As you can see, we have a way to understand our team's participation in certain things, and we have pulse checks that we do monthly on the different departments and how they're doing and how they're feeling. You can obviously see inside this one, the design department at 4.3 needs way more work to do daily. They're just way too happy. But largely, you have a bunch of questions that you ask and ways that you check in with your teams and visualizations. And I'll credit Alex, our CPO, as well for the amazing Tableau visualizations for us. We obsess over our team's health after COVID times. Like we've really, really realized how important, or we knew how important this was, but like when you're working and you're focusing as a business owner potentially as well, you focus on the business not crumbling, but you have to focus on the individuals in the teams. Especially if you're trying to build 100 ventures a year, it's quite a stressful thing, and it takes a lot of grit. But largely, we use Geekbot. Basically, this thing is a daily pulse check that the engineering team have so gladly liked to experiment over the last 2 months with us, and they've kind of actually just really enjoyed doing it. What happens, and I'll show you quickly here. I'll jump back to it now. If you can see the top right, someone said that they were unhappy. So I'll just go here. So here, someone said that they're unhappy. Not instantly, but someone would actually, one of the leads or the pod leads would actually check in with the person, see how they're doing, and actually report back. This is obviously a private channel. I would report back and say, hey, the guy just went for his vaccine, he's actually okay. So fundamentally, we have also like a proactive way to like actually step in with individuals and look after our team. Something else, one of the ventures where we help build is Strove. It helps like gamify and incentivize employee health. So this is from like actual exercise. I think it's also bringing in meditation, or has meditation now already. And that's really important. So what it does is it partners like with rewards and provides your employees rewards. So an organization basically sign up with us, and you have like a dashboard to understand the actual physical health of your teams, and gamify it. And we have like leaderboards in Delta with people doing runs and runs and walks and hikes and stuff like that. And so really important to do. So the last thing I'm to show you is just a combination of everything we spoke about. And I promise this is the last slide, so it was a lot today. But basically, we have like build AMAs and leaderships that are open channels, because we're not trying to hide anything. We want to like have people collaborate and ask questions and communicate with like the CEO, the CPO, the CTO. The Asynchronous project is something that I'm running to like move more into like asynchronous work. Obviously, as being remote, I need to make sure that the systems and fundamentals of my team run remotely. It also benefits the company as well, because it enables the company to hire across the world. Recognition and celebrations and stuff are all remote, and people make a big thing about it to make someone feel special. Pulse checks, like I showed you. I used to have zero. I used to be, I think maybe I don't really have it in here, but basically I used to do 1 to 10 pulse checks of like how you're feeling. It doesn't really, it's a bit of effort to figure out whether you're 6, 7 or whatever. I've changed this to unhappy, somewhat happy, neutral, happy, and really neutral. I'm still debating, because some people have opted out to be lazy and use neutral as a basic. So that's something to to tweak. But fundamentally, as you can see, we use workflows. We follow like open like and transparency as best as we can. We have automated stand-ups that people have access to, whether the person went there or not. They would have like, what did you do? How are you actually today? And then what's something really cool is we can pull some interesting stats from like the work that you're working on, the venture that you're working on, the team that is part of that, and how you're feeling on a given day. And we can actually potentially be proactive in like moving people around if they're not like fitting in properly, or sorting out the cultural aspect there. So insights is what matters. And participation is the last thing. So like actually having an understanding of how many people are participating in the feedback cycles, lessons learned, and whatnot. So yeah, that was probably a lot. Thank you for listening. And hopefully we have some time for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jared. That was very, very cool insights into how you folks run things at the Delta. So we do have quite a few questions, but I think we're also at the end of our time. So what I think we'll try to do is, some people have duplicate questions, and what we'll do is I'll ask maybe one question from each person, a unique question, and then perhaps to the end, we'll just grab those questions and maybe send them through to you at some point, and maybe we can curate at a later date. But let's try run through a couple, if we can, in the next 5 minutes, and then are you okay with it? I know you've got a little bit of time. Is that all right to do?
No, it's fine. Let's go. Let's go for it.
Cool. So the first question from Robin, with developers able to work anywhere and many companies trying to adjust based on the cost of living, how do you tend to approach remuneration with nomadic teams?
So unfortunately, we're not at the extent where we've had to deal with it at scale. So it's obviously a very small subset of our team is not in South Africa, somewhere in South Africa. So currently, the fundamental is we'll like remuneration based on our South African entity. So like South Africa for now. We're working towards looking at and our public holidays, our time zone and stuff like that. We're working towards a system to actually manage that with our, because I mean, there's brackets, especially if you're service-based, you have rates that you bill as well. So we're working towards a way to deal with that from a different country. And what I think that potentially what we will do is we will base it on the country that person is in when we're looking at someone that is not a nomad, so just working remotely. I don't know if I answered the whole question, but basically, yeah, we have a small subset just right now. We're busy on like let's say the compliance and the issues that come behind this. We'll most likely base it on the country the person resides in, and the tools and services around allowing us to hire remotely and deal with like tax and a whole bunch of things that we're working towards.
Awesome.
If you want more details, maybe just actually, if you want more details, there's GitLab has actually wrote the book on that specific part. And I can maybe just pass it to someone afterwards, and then you can get that line of that entry. They've actually explained how they do it and how they manage it. And it's far more sophisticated than what we have gotten to just yet.
Perfect. Thank you, Jared. Alexia P asks, how do you folks manage releases synchronously?
Interesting. So, to be honest, the teams at the moment, the ventures are in different life cycles. Let's say stages. Sorry, stages of their life cycle. So some are early stage where releasing is. I mean, we're working towards more of a rapid releasing structure. So releases aren't like super planned. We have some bigger ventures that have planned releases, and people come onto a meeting. They'll set up like a war room and they'll do a release basically. So one or two of our pharmaceutical ventures, and it'll be synchronous. And it'll be set and tested beforehand, and everything will be ready. And they'll sit together and they'll release in whatever time slot that the team itself has decided on the release. We're working towards more of a let's say our CI/CD processes are I would say more medium in us being a young team, are more in the like medium size of things. So in other words, they're not as super defined for everything. We're going towards more of a direction now in the coming 2-3 months where most of our releases will be asynchronous. They will be, once you finish the feature, it's tested and it's deployed. It will be deployed during operational times, most likely. So our services and systems will enable us to rapidly and consistently release. So we're working towards a process where, for example, if you put your code, you build, you write a piece of code, you commit, deploy, test, package, deploy, rolls out tests on the server, checks, goes, okay, cool, it's happy, and then it'll actually roll it to production. So we're working towards more of a process where that type of, let's say, synchronous deployments won't really be a thing for us. We would kind of just circumvent it by following true CI/CD methodologies at all.
Awesome, thank you, Jared. I think we're going to have one last question and then we'll wrap up. So Matthew has asked, how do you balance providing well-defined and clear feature requests to your team while still giving them the freedom to own their work and come up with the solutions themselves?
So that is a great question. So this, like the CPO, so Alex and I bump heads a lot on this. It's really tough. It's actually one of the hardest things I think that we've had challenges with, because we have so many issues with time. Their budgets are different, their contexts are different. So the way the culture works is very simple in the fact that product helps us figure out what, and prioritization, let's say what needs to be achieved. The engineering team often do the how, so they figure out the solution behind it, and they work together to actually figure out like the prioritization of that and the detail behind it. It's not something we've done well in the first part of our scaling. It depends on like seniority of the team. It depends how well they've worked together before. It depends how well they understand the industry. It depends on the context and the ability to like figure out unknowns within the venturing. So if I would say, like, if it's a well-defined industry that we've worked in before, our team has worked in before, if it's a well-defined product, because our products are often, if it's so our product, so there's two parts of our product side. Some of our product is well defined beforehand. We have prototypes before it even becomes a product, before it even gets like into engineering almost. And it goes through iterations and stage gates of like reviews of technical UI, UX, and whatever like that. But sometimes we come out with a blueprint that the engineering team and the product team have worked together on, and it's a blueprint. It basically is like, this is what we're building, this is how it works, this is the like all aspects to the piece of work as an MVP, and we'll build it. So it's pretty well clear defined. That's like one of the best case ones. Then we have the I would say more of the engineering focused ventures, where we've done technical specifications ahead of time. Less, I would say, like it would start less agile. It'll be more waterfall in the start, because these systems have to scale. They have a lot of compliance to go through with banks and pharmaceuticals or whatever. And again, it's well defined. Those ones we often don't have problems with, obviously, because a lot of it is well defined. And to break those stories up and those features up, it's relatively easy. And the breadth of the solution behind that is slightly more rigid. So the engineering team would have more, they would be included earlier, and they'll be assisting the actual solution and the how, and like how it will be solved. Our pain points actually come from our early stage stuff, where it's more of a POC. We're figuring it out at the same time, but we also have to deliver like something that like shows a solution to the market or to the customers and the clients as Delta as well. And those are the ones we haven't, to be honest, worked out perfectly. We're still figuring out what is the best way, when to include people, because when you include too many people too early, it becomes very it's not cost effective. If you include engineering too late, and it's a lot of product in the start, there's a lot of open-ended questions and potentially you get just given a specification and there's no innovation. So there's a combination where we try to actually we have tech leads and we have product leads, which act as our CTO and our CPO on these ventures. And it's their accountability and responsibility. And they actually drive that. And they have like a clear accountability level and responsibility level for that specific focus. And they'll actually work with the team closely. And that's kind of how we've solved it to date. So basically, we've put that type of responsibility, autonomy inside our team. And I'm not saying we've done it perfectly to date. We have a lot of hiccups still, but we have put that down into the team, and we're busy with this process now, where we're making sure that they have access to everything they need, and they have the skill that they need to basically function like we function at that level, which provides them, which I think solves that problem, to be honest. Sorry, it's a very long answer to a question, but I thought the context would matter.
Thank you very much, Jared. I think that's all the time we have in terms of questions. I think the first is thank you so much for your time. I think you've provided a lot of people of insights of how the Delta works, how you folks experiment and test things and work with folks remotely, and similarly how you've taken on a nomadic life and made that work and used it to your advantage. So we really, really appreciate your talk. And as a token of the tech leadership team, we always gift our speakers a book or Audible or Kindle book. Since you're in Georgia, I think it'll be difficult to get something physical to you. So we'll reach out and try to figure out which book you would like. Before we end off though, Tanaka, do you have anything that you need to say on behalf of the sponsors?
Yeah, I'll be quick just to acknowledge our sponsors again for the evening, Peach Payments and OfficeIn, and just thank them for supporting our community. And just with OfficeIn swag competition, if you're interested, just grab the link in the chat. I think I dropped it a couple of times, and you can still fill in the form after the meetup, and you could get some swag coming your way. And also thanks again to Jared for joining us this evening. Yes, Jared, thank you so much. This has been super, super cool. Do you have one last word? Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, I was just saying, yeah, it was great. I'm sorry that I piled a lot of information in a short amount of time. I speak really fast. Everyone knows this in my team, so apologies. But if you guys have questions and stuff that I didn't cover, I'm more than happy to answer them. You can hit me up on like LinkedIn or whatever form, or pass it to Benny. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll see you next time. I think that brings our little event to a close, and hopefully we'll have a great speaker or a different format for you next month. Catch you all later. Thanks everyone.